Oh. Just the thing.
How's that?
Yeah, that's good. Perfect.
Okay. Oi.
Have your Janet Jackson microphone moment.
Tēnā koutou, o tira tēnā tātou, I mua I te rere o ngā mihi, tēnei rā ka taki ake I tētahi karakia hei tīmata ake I tō tātou pō, no reira. Tīkina atu rā te pūtake o ngā kōrero I te wānanga, tīkina atu rā te hautapu o ngā riki. Kauwhatatia e tāne te wānanga ki runga ki e nei taura, ki runga ki e nei tauira. Kia koi te matapunenga mai angi I te matapu iho, ka whakamau ai kia tīnā, ui e tā iki e. Aha te hau e wawara, he tiu he raki. Nāna ia mai te pūpūtara ki hiki uta, I tikina atu e au te kōtū, ko ia rā te pau kātū ki runga ki te wai te mata. Tihei mauri ora. Ko te ao mārama tēnei e whiti nei ki runga ki a tāua te tangata, a ko te pō ki a rātou mā tēnei rā ka tahuri ake I ngā whakaaro ki a rātou, ko ngaro I te tirohanga kanohi, o tira kua whiti ki tua kei te pō, rātou, ko te kōrero nui tēnei ki a rātou mā, e moi. Ka huri tū e te iwi ki a tātou kua pūtahi mai nei I tēnei pō, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā koutou. Nau mai, haere mai, piri mai, whakatau mai ki tēnei huihuinga o tātou I tēnei pō. Nei rā, te reo o Ngāti Whātua o Rākei, nei rā, ngā uri o tupiriri e mihi atu nei ki o koutou, are mai nei ngā taringa, ki te whakarongo ki ngā kōrero kei mua I te aroaro I tēnei pō, ki te whakarongo ki ngā kōrero mō tātou e noho nei ki runga o tāmaki makaurau, ngā kōrero mō tātou tūpuna, ngā kōrero hoki, mō ngā ahuatanga kei mua I te aroaro, hei ngā tau e haere ake nei. Nei rā mātou, ko oku hoa, e pōhiri atu nei I a koutou, kia piri mai, nau mai, piri mai, tau maira. Ko te tūmanako e ora ana rā tātou, ina rā tātou o tāmaki, e noho nei I wānginui I tēnei āhuatanga, o tēnei mate rere haere nei, e ai ki ngā kōrero ka tūwhera anō ngā keti ki a tātou, engari ko te mea nui kia noho haumaru tātou, kia tiaki tātou I a tātou anō, mā tērā e ora ai tātou katoa. Nō reira, tēnei rā te mihi atu ki a koutou, o tira ka rere hoki ngā mihi ki a koe te rangatira e te matua, Councillor Alf Filipaina, ko koe hoki tēnei kua piri mai I tēnei pō, mō muri pēr, koe kōrero mai ai ki a mātou hoki kōrero atu ai ki a koe, ko koe tēnā e manaki ana I ngā ahuatanga o te mānukanuka o Hoturoa, tērā taha o ngā wai, nei rā mātou o Ngāti Whātua o Rākei, e manaki nei I tēnei taha, me te pokapū hoki o te taone, whakawhiti atu ana rā ki te raki pai whenua, tai atu ana rā ki tauhinu pā, ko te wai te mata tēnei e kōrero hia nei, no reira tēnei rā e mihi atu nei ki a koe, I haere mai I tō kāinga, I haere mai te moana nui a kiwa, I whale atiu, kua tau mai nei ki a tātou, ko tātou tēnei, ko tātou katoa tēnei I haere mai, I te moana nui a kiwa, kua tau nei ki runga o Aotearoa, kua tau mai nei ki runga o Tāmaki Makaurau, tēnā koe, tēnā koe, tēnā koe. Nō reira e te iwi, koutou katoa e mātakitaki maina, tēnei te reo mihi, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. He aha te hau a wawara mai, He tiu he rā ki nāna ia mai te pū, pūtara ki hiki uta e tiki nā tu e au, te kotiu ko ia te pou whakairo ka tū ki wai te mata i o kuairangi kōkiri.
Tēnei te mihi ki a koe, Robbie, mō tō karakia me mihi whakatau kia tātou katoa i tēnei pō. I know my haramai, everybody out there in the virtual world space that is currently watching us beaming to you from our respective bedrooms, quite likely, to this kōrero tonight. Welcome, kia ora, talofa, no mai haramai. I have the pleasure of emceeing this event this evening, and I have to admit it is getting stranger and stranger doing some of these things virtually. However, I am incredibly honoured and humbled by the opportunity that people like Auckland Council are continuing to make to have these types of conversations. So firstly, I'd just like to mihi up to the crew that are supporting us tonight. So you'll see some kind of cameraed off, muted bubbles in our space, and that is our crew that has been helping us, as well as Phil Wihongi, who couldn't make it tonight. So we just want to mihi out to you all for helping us and for making this happen. As well as that, as Robbie covered, big mihi to Councillor Alf Filipaina for joining us tonight. He'll pop in and join us as a floating bubblehead later on in the evening to kind of sum up this kōrero for us and with us, which we're really looking forward to, and we're quite grateful to have him here. We also just want to mihi out to our mate. We had one other person who was meant to be on the panel tonight, but who unfortunately was unable to make it. We just want to send him health and, well-being vibes so that our hoa gets better and feels good. What else to cover off? There's a lot to talk about tonight. We've got an exciting kōrero. Look, I want to cover off a couple of little housekeeping things, I suppose. One, for those that aren't aware already, but this kōrero is being recorded. So hopefully this will be available for your viewing and or listening pleasure, I think, at a later date if you require it, or you want to share with your colleagues and friends and whānau. So there is that. I think you can work out where your own exits are, and I do hope you have wine. So other than that, I think those are the technical elements of tonight. And we've got our team that are monitoring the Q&A box. So if you at any point are inspired, want more information, want us to expand on something, type it into the chat box. I'm pretty sure everybody's pretty au fait with the old Zoom chat box these days. So sorry, the Q&A, and our team will monitor that. And at the end of tonight's discussion, I'll take the opportunity to look at some of those questions and see if we can weave that back in. So if you try to put your hand up or anything like that, unfortunately, we won't be able to see you. We can't see you in the crowd and get waved down. So just make sure you type it in, and don't be shy. We're looking forward to this being as much of a discussion as we can possibly facilitate virtually. So those are our kind of grunty things. The particular way that our council friends have structured this kōrero tonight, I think is super fascinating, and I just want to take an opportunity to read out what has been written, because I know you've probably all read it again, but I think this is the thing we're really responding to. So I'm going to read the sort of provocation and or blurb that Phil Wihongi wrote. Ka pū te ruha ka Hao Te Rangatahi is a traditional whakatauki often quoted to denote an intergenerational transition or shift in leadership from within an established paradigm towards newer approaches, most often guided by more youthful leaders. Auckland has a fresh generation of Māori and Moana Oceania leaders who are bringing culturally grounded whenua, kinship-based, innovative thinking and practices to their work. These leaders focus on ensuring that Indigenous and whānau ainga kainga values are an integral part of our city shaping, and that the faces of tamariki mokopuna are woven into our urban and societal fabrics for the future. Tonight's Kōrero Auckland Conversations will bring together a panel of emerging Māori and Moana Oceania leaders who will discuss how they are ensuring that the memories and knowledge of past generations are recognised through their work and will articulate their vision for the city centre, one that is uniquely Tāmaki Makaurau. I wanted to read that out partly to remind ourselves as panellists exactly the wero that was laid down before us, I guess, but also just to get the juices flowing around what kind of a discussion tonight might be. It's a bit about inspiration, it's a bit about the mahi we're doing, it's a bit about thinking around our own whakapapa, where we have come from and where we are hoping to head to and what we would like to leave behind. So that is the continuum of thinking we're trying to cover tonight. So nothing short of an enormous, probably 200-year-long conversation in about an hour and a half, very casual, very, very Māori and Pacific, naturally. Before we get to that, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves, and then I will also introduce myself, which I have not done yet. I am conscious of. You can see our little names floating out. You've probably seen our faces in the mail out, but I'll hand over to our panelists. So we'll start with you, Robbie, then Mons, then Kara, if that's okay. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe te tuahine I nā kōrero. Kia ora mai anō rā tātou katoa. Ko Robbie Paola tōku ingoa. No Ngāti Whātua Rake. It's nice to be here tonight with some friends to have a kōrero. I guess I represent Whai Maia, which is the social, cultural and environmental arm of our iwi. We have our trust board, our commercial arm, and here I am working for Whai Maia. I also am part of the cultural and heritage team. I'm lucky enough to be a part of that team, which looks after the kōrero tuku iho of all the sites of significance throughout Tāmaki Makaurau, and I'm happy to be here. Nō reira, tēnā koutou.
Kia ora no tātou, tautoko ngā kōrero a te tuahine, ka nui te mihi kia koe Robbie, nā koe whakatūwhera I tō mātou rā te kaupapa o tēnei kōrero, nā reira tēnei te mihi kia tātou katoa kua tai mai, kua hui mai ki te whakarongo ki a mātou kōrero, nā reira ka nui ngā mihi. Ko Monster Juice tupura tōku ingoa, hiori au no te tairāwhiti, no te atanga mahaki, te whānau kai, I te tautoku mama, I te tautoku pāpā no ngā tupurau. Kia ora. Kia ora everyone, my name is Monster Juice Tupara, born and bred from the East Coast, raised in Gisborne. My whole life up until the point I decided I wanted to study architecture. Then I moved up to Auckland. And I thought it could be interesting to kind of talk through that journey actually as a part of my introduction to kind of highlight the vehicle that brings me here tonight. Studied at the University of Auckland and I completed my thesis at the end of 2019, of which our fellow panelist Karamia was there to crit me. Literally the day after that, I started an internship at Auckland Council, which as a part of the Māori design team alongside Phil Wihongi, Olivia Haddon, and what was then the He Maunga He Tangata intern Alia May. And that was with the Auckland Design Office, now Urban Design Unit. And that experience was huge for me. And as a part of my time there, I got to work on a whole heap of things. And one of Phil's biggest things is getting, trying to flood, architecture firms and other practices with more Māori and Pacifica people. So during my time there, I was lucky enough to spend some time at a few different architecture firms, of which I was lucky enough to be offered a role at Jasmax, which ties into my hononga to our facilitator tonight, the wonderful Elisapeta Heta. So I'm an architectural graduate at JASMAX, and on top of that, I'm a tauira whaihanga with the Wakamaya team, where we do a lot of Māori-focused mahi, and are there to kind of help our practice, along our bicultural journey. Super excited to be a part of this kōrero tonight with my fellow panelists, and I'm really looking forward to it. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mansol. Thank you, Elisapeta. Kia ora koutou, malo lava le soifua, o lo omo ingo o Karamia. I'm a lecturer. My name is Karamia, and I'm a lecturer at the School of Architecture and Planning in the Faculty of Kai at the University of Auckland. I think through Indigenous spatial practices, creative practices, and I'm honoured to be here. I'm also the youngest of 5, so I'm very much used to keeping it brief when I say hello. So I will end there, but just to say thank you also to the Auckland City Council whānau and the Auckland Conversations team, and of course my fellow panelists for having me on board a youthful waka. Kia ora.
Karamia and I are going to drag out the youth as much as humanly possible tonight, I believe. Kia ora koutou, ai ko Elisapeta Hinimua Heta taku ingoa, I te taha o tōku pāpā, ko Ngāti Wai, me Waikato Tainui ahau, I te taha o tōku māma, ko Samoa, Tokelau, me Inarangi ahau, anō hoki. So I have a bit of a mixed / mashup of whakapapa, which I am incredibly proud of, and love that it really tends to make me from Tāmaki Makaurau in that bit of a city of sales kind of baby, I suppose. I am fortunate to have grown up in Tāmaki Makaurau in Te Atatu for the majority of my life. Studied out there and then came into Taonenui, to also study architecture at the University of Auckland, and then later I also did another master's degree through the Museums and Cultural Heritage Department, particularly looking into artist collectives. So I've kind of had this very interesting life that's both looked at our relationship to kind of space and history and what's been told and what's not been told, both through the lens of architecture and also through the arts. That's been kind of how I've come to the types of mahi I do now. And now I am presently an associate principal and also a kaihotu whaihanga at JASMAX. I co-founded and am a co-lead for our Wakamaya Rōpū, and am incredibly grateful for that position. Within our team at JASMAX, as Mansell has covered, we have this amazing position now to be able to support our project teams and all of our clients, and hopefully more mana whenua, more and more and more coming into these projects. And it's fundamentally about our ability to change the way our built environment looks and feels for future generations is what gets me up every single day to do my mahi. And I feel very lucky to be able to do that. I suppose outside of my 9 to 5 as well, I do a lot of writing and have had quite a few exhibitions over the years, including this year being very fortunate to have brought an exhibition home from the City Biennale last year to Tāmaki Makaurau to show at Object Space, which was a collaboration with the very esteemed photographer John Miller, who has also seen and documented effectively the entire history of Māori social movements in Aotearoa over the last 50 years. So a diverse background is where I come from, both in terms of whakapapa as well in terms of the types of mahi I do. But from my perspective, it is always fundamentally about being able to tell our stories in our spaces and normalising those. So that's a little bit about who I am and where I am from. So to kick off the kōrero, I've done the classic thing of setting up tonight's discussion to think about it in terms of the past, the present and the future. But we do know that, of course, everything is cyclical and everything kind of interweaves. But is a nice kind of place to start, in a way, I suppose, to situate each of our panelists in relation to their mahi. I wanted to think a bit about whakapapa. So effectively, what I'd like each of our panelists to talk about, and I might, because you're all far too polite, I might have to prompt you all, but regardless, I'd like each to be able to touch on one person or kaupapa or a moment in your history, in your life, or your whakapapa, if it's not inside of your physical memory, but you know it's contributed to who you are now and why you do what you do. I guess what I'd like to give our audience a taste of tonight is just thinking a little bit about, you know, the fact that we sit within a continuum. We are not ever individuals approaching these jobs, these careers, these projects with this kind of individualistic pursuit. We very much sit within communities and kind of lines of ancestors that sit behind us that really push us on. So, you know, this is the kind of conversation that actually could go for forever and ever. It's a beautiful wānanga, so just pick the one if you've got one that stands out for you that has really inspired you or has enabled you even. And that's where I would love to start. So I might start with our apparent youngest of five. No, youngest of five, but older than me, because I'm gonna claim it. And see, this is the beginning of me being a dork in a virtual kind of conversation. Kia ora. We'll start with you, Cara, and then we might jump to Robbie and then Mons. That's how I'm gonna jump around.
Yeah, I feel like I'm the youngest of five, but the oldest of this panel. So that's a nice way of finding the middle ground. Well, in terms of whakapapa, I'm a very traditional Samoan girl, I guess. It's my father, and I can't really identify my father without identifying my mother as this kind of key person. They both worked in public service. They were both very Samoan, and they thought through being part of a community, being a kind of action, being part of a community as an act of service. That's a very Samoan thing to do as well, to conceptualize your commitment to your community as one of service. And I also think they had very interesting approaches. My father passed on to me from his mother the idea that a compromise is a promise between two people. And I think within my current role, which is a lecturer at the university, I think through how the university has let Māori and Pacific communities down before, and I think about repairing that trust. And I think about repairing that trust by thinking about a promise, and how upholding a promise is an act of service. So that's one person. And then I think my mother, in terms of, she was very creative woman, and very much found pleasure in creativity, and found pleasure in herself found pleasure for herself in being creative and making things for people. And so that kind of imagination and play, I think I'd like to think that I've managed to find a way forward with that double hull waka. So yeah, those are the two people in my whakapapa that have shaped and influenced not only who I am, but also the approach I have to the kind of roles I undertake.
Beautiful. Robbie?
Kia ora karamia, kia ora anō koutou. I want to talk about my tupuna tupiriri, because Ngāti Whātua o Rākei all descend from him. He's 10 generations back from myself. He came through in the mid-1700s from Kaipara through to Tāmaki here. He lived on Maunga Kieke, One Tree Hill. His older brother Waitaheke and his uncle Waha Akiaki, they actually came through a little bit before him. He was quite young at the time, but they came through and led the conquest into Tāmaki. And not too long after, Tupiriri came through, and he actually had 4 kids, and he himself stayed at Maunga Kieke, but he spread his 4 kids across Tāmaki, and they had kids who had kids who had kids who had kids. And I guess there's roughly about 6,000 to 7,000 of us now, uri of tupiriri. And I guess it's up to us to look after the whenua of Tamaki Makaurau and the wai of Tamaki Makaurau. And I'm really proud of that history and to be an uri of his, and also all of them. You know, we acknowledge tupiriri as our tupuna, of course, but there were so many of them that without one of them, you know, some of us wouldn't be here today. He's also the grandfather of Apihai Te Kawo, who gifted the whenua to, I guess, what we consider the Central Isthmus, from standing on Maunga Fo, stretching up to Taurarua Pa and across to Opo to Keha, which is Cox's Creek, 3,000 acres, and invited Governor Hobson from up north and to come and start the city here back in 1840, which was 100 years after our arrival. And here we are still today. At that time, our name was Te Tāu, but a lot of iwi, they evolve. And this name, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, is only a new name because when we had made that name, it was pretty much the only land that we had left, which was the Ōrākei block. But, you know, here we are, we're working with council, with our partnership, and everything that we do is for the betterment of our whenua, our relationships, looking after our taiao, because, you know, those are our tupuna, and here we are today, we're going to be tupuna for our uri, for our descendants, and I hope that they talk about us and what we have done for the betterment of our city and for the betterment of our place, which we call Tamaki Makaurau. So, yeah, I acknowledge my tupuna tupiriri, and I guess he's the reason why I'm here, and he's also the reason why I know who I am, and he's the reason why I do what I do.
Kia ora, Ihua. Kia ora. Yeah, that's a big one. Mons, you want to follow that up?
Nah, kia ora for that kōrero, bro.
Yeah,
it's an interesting, I think it's a really interesting starting point for us when we talk about whakapapa. I always find it interesting to see, you know, if we are, you know, selecting how deep each of us go. So it's quite interesting to see, you know, someone more kind of immediate from Karamia, and then someone a bit deeper from Robbie. So I'll try and hopefully it's a good segue to my one, because a lot of your kōrero just now reminds me a lot of my uncle Peter Tupara, whom I'm named after. But he speaks about all of our history, all of our tupuna, all of that with the same level of passion and kind of getting us the bigger reason being to educate all me and all my cousins and all of that about, you know, where we come from and what brings us here. But in terms of kind of balancing that out, it's, you know, I look at him as that kind of, you know, that poignant figure to me. He was the impetus for me in particular to get into architecture, and he really kind of ignited my passion, you know, in everything. He's a carpenter, he's a builder back home, but he works alongside my other uncle Nick Tupara, who's an artist and has a couple pieces back down in Gizzy as well, and they kind of have tag team a couple of items over the years. But he's, you know, for me, he's been like a huge role model and someone that I've really wanted to kind of, you know, if I could get anywhere near the type of person he is, I'd be, you know, a happy man. You know, he's always someone to say, you know, to say yes to everyone, whether it's getting, you know, just chop down like a bunch of wood and we need to get it out to all the kaumātua around the area, load up some trailers and just drive around, go house by house. He's actually says yes too often, to the point where he's got a reputation of not finishing. So I hope I can kind of work on that, and maybe I'm the evolved version of that would be nice. But like tying into kind of the immediacy of his effect on me, but also how he entrenches, you know, where we come from and kind of what has brought us here today.
It's beautiful. I mean, the reality is, right, that Tuparere and his legacy affects us all, But actually, when I was thinking about you all speaking, all of your whakapapa affects us all. And I was listening to a conversation the other day. Somebody said 4 generations back is still within living memory. 10 generations back is when you start to get into the realm of mythology. So the bigness of a person's character is in some ways, well, the way I interpret it is almost, it envelops a people, you know, it envelops a space. And it's quite amazing to think about that in terms of what will happen in 10 more generations, the you know, the whakapapa that Tuparere would still have left behind, that Monsol's uncle would have in many more generations of tupara whānau. And equally, I think there's stitching kind of conversations here about ideas of service, very much a big conversation in my Samoan family as well. The notion of service is quite big. And I think service is being touched on in different ways. You know, what Tuparere did wasn't necessarily about service, but was most definitely about this gift, which was a kind of service. It was really about this ability to project forward into the future in a way that was hopeful for his people. And I think that's kind of what we're all trying to do. So I don't know. So I'm in awe, I think, of all of your kōrero, actually, is probably the best way to think about it, because regardless of whether it's 1 generation back or 20, it does still affect us in quite real ways in our day-to-day life. And I know that that's something that our Rōpū at Jasmax, for example, we talk about quite a lot, is actually that our whakapapa is ever present. You know, we can't show up to work and leave our whakapapa at the door in the hopes that you know, you can sort of strip yourself of certain things to get a job done, because that's not possible. And I think it's a very, very Māori, very, like for me, Samoan, it's a very kind of tangata moana thing to do, where we always show up in relation to the multitudes of people and place that we're from and of. We literally can never be alone. And I think that that's quite fascinating and beautiful and actually really empowering. It's probably why I think conversations like these, and actually the potential of where we're headed in the future, is so kind of visceral at the moment, is because you are getting more and more of the Robbies, Monsols and Karamea in the universe who are actually tapping into the vein of the whakapapa that we have, and we are using it, not leaving it at the door anymore, which, you know, used to have to happen for a different reason, but validly. You know, some people in our history, there was a separation for various reasons of how you could be Māori or Pasifika at work, and that's changing for the better. And I think that's the tangible thing people are feeling now. It's like there's this thing about, and I did this like, oh, when I read what Phil wrote about the word leadership, purely because I sometimes feel, you know, I think about people that are 50 years older than me. I think about it in terms of age, but actually when I look at these three, I know that what he has written is very, very true in terms of leadership and that tapping into that vein. So thank you for sharing your kōrero about your whakapapa, because I know it's not we don't take those kōrero lightly either. I wanted to segue a little bit into thinking about your mahi and just kind of digging in. Literally, let's just ground ourselves a little bit into some of the kaupapa we're involved in at the moment. So I mean, and this can be a conversation, and if you guys have questions for each other, you know, floor is open. But I'd like to think, let's just share some of the kaupapa that you've been involved in that you're really proud of. Could be recent, like within the last few years, could be current, or could be about to happen, if you are comfortable enough to share some of the things that are sort of in the horizon, in the immediate horizon. But I'm sure people would love to know kind of a bit of an insight into your lives. So let's start there, I reckon. And I'm gonna, because I've started with Robbie and then Kara, I'm gonna give Mons a go to kind of kick us off. Um,
Yeah.
and then we'll just kind of keep going around the tracks, eh?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's cool, and that's a good starting point, since you've been a big part of the mahi that I've been involved with.
Yeah, I should ban
and
you for
during
talking about me.
my mahi here at Jazzmax.
Yeah.
But yeah, in all seriousness, a big, a lot in terms of mahi that I'm super proud of. A lot of it tends to be, a lot of the mahi around the work that we do with our Rōpū Wakamaya, but then also, our moana practitioners as well. In particular, especially given that I'm still quite early in terms of like, my career journey, and kind of bridging, or like helping to bridge that step from university to work life, has been, in particular, one of the cool kaupapa that I've been lucky enough to work on alongside yourself and others. Recently, we've started what we call crit culture. We've had some crit nights where we've opened, kind of, dissected the idea of the crit, where we, present our mahi. And it's, as students, it used to be like really difficult to get any kind of meaningful feedback whenever we're talking about anything, kaupapa driven, or this kind of stuff, simply because there isn't much of us or much people to really comment into it. And then kind of on top of that, feeding back to, these forms are kind of how some of the unis tend to be a bit siloed. So kind of dissecting that and opening it up between the different universities, the likes of Auckland Uni, Unitech, and AUT as well, and then just bringing everyone in, and then also getting them in the office as well. Back when we could, we've since done a virtual version of that as well. But for a lot of them, and much like me, I hadn't stepped into an architecture firm, until I came into Jazzmax and spent time with Auckland Council. So just getting a foot in the actual door of an actual architecture firm is kind of huge, and a really big deal that some of us take for granted. So being able to kind of help with things like that, and still being able to do that even in a lockdown environment, was really big. And then kind of like tying down to high school, to university as well. We've had some mahi around that. We've had some schools and just kind of opening up, that possibility that they can jump into this type of career. I remember being back at Gisborne Boys High School, speaking to my career advisor, questioning whether it was viable for me to pursue a career in architecture.
Your careers advisor was questioning you.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
knew kind of really nothing of my background or anything, and those are kind of a lot of the barriers that are stopping a lot of Māori and Pacific people from even thinking that's a possibility. So trying to break down those barriers and get more of those kind of kaupapa going and being involved and really pushing for that is huge. And those are the things that that I've been really passionate and really proud to be part of, and hopefully we can have more of them.
Yeah, I think there's several elements to that, but I know that there, a lot of that is in and around breaking down barriers, and particularly that idea of you can't be what you can't see. It's a kind of a catchy phrase, but it actually is very real. It's real in terms of our physical environment. It's real in terms of the people who occupy those environments. And I think there's a lot of work actually between all three of you that is definitely around breaking down barriers or reintroducing ourselves, actually, to our own kōrero. Yeah, I mean, Robbie, you were talking a little bit about there's a rōpū of you at the moment that are basically getting back out into the whenua and, almost speaking the names of places back to them, as being quite an inspiring project. I don't know if that's the one you want to kōrero to, but I found that to be really powerful.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe, bro. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Mihi ana kua kōrero. Yeah, so there, we have started to use our iwi, the people that I work with, my cousins, my matua. We've started using the tupuna names for the places throughout Tāmaki Makaurau. And I think it's really cool. Like I was saying before, we've only been here for 280 years in Tāmaki. So a lot of these names actually existed before our arrival, but we've managed to keep some of those names, or a lot of those names, the ones that have been researched by historians, and actually recently we've started using them again. So when we're going places, we'll say we're going to so and so, we're going to this place, we're going to this place, and there may be only about 10 of us at the moment, but I definitely know within the next 10 to 15 years to 20 years, there'll be a lot more of us actually using these names, promoting the return of these names, so that it's actually, you know, normalized again. And what comes along with that, especially in my mahi, which I'm not proud of, but I'm super proud to be a part of, is to gather all the kōrero for all of these places into one place where we can eventually, which I mean, we've already started to share a lot with whānau on online and lives, but what I'm thinking of for the future is to gather kōrero for a lot of these places, the stories that come with them, so that it's just easier for the next generation when they want to start learning about all of these places. It's easier for them to just access the kōrero for these places, why they're named their names, and of course another part of the mahi that my team does, the team that I work with, is a lot of the stuff with council and a lot of development that's going across the city. They, you know, if you're familiar with CVAs, and we have to read a lot of AEEs, which are assessments of environmental effects, and then we give our feedback on the environmental outcomes that we want for what they're developing, and we provide that either through hui or through a CVA, which is the cultural values assessment. And of course, there are two big parts of it. The first big part of it is our connection to the whenua, to the wai, the connection to those places, why we're there. And then the second big part is what we're trying to protect, what we're trying to look after. And I guess it's so much easier to provide that kōrero and that feedback when you actually have a connection to the whenua. A few names are in our karakia and in our waiata and in our mihi mihi. But I think it's a little bit more, I guess it's pretty cool when you can actually see what you're talking about. So there's what we're doing now is gathering the kōrero and actually wanting to go and visit all of those sites, touch the places, get a feel for the places, set up protection for them. A lot of my cousins and matua are doing all the planting throughout the city and all the weeding throughout the city and all of those things. That's another vibe and another cool thing in itself. So I guess here I am playing my little part, which is I love to research and rangahau. I love history. I love I love history and I love kōrero tuku iho, and this is me playing my part, and hopefully it helps with the bigger picture of what my team's doing, what Whai Mai is doing, who I work with. There's 150 of us, and what Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei as a whole are doing.
Kia ora. That sounds really exciting. And I think as well, you know, from the perspective of those of us whose iwi are and hapu are also trying to do other variations of kind of similar amounts of research and you know, breathing life back into our whenua and our moana, our awa. It's I always find it really uplifting to see how others are doing it. And I mean, I guess given my proximity physically to Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, as in I literally live in Parnell and you fellas are just over the hill. You know, well, my mates anyway are just over the hill, but I know this is the whenua of Whātua. It's I feel that the energy of the restoration, and I think restoration is a big thing. You know, there was I remember being in Tumutumu Whenua and somebody speaking about the kind of phases of going from a state of survival to a state of thriving, and I suppose it's aspirational for some of us still to be heading in that direction. So yeah, I just killed her for that, Robbie, because that's exciting. Whether or not you think you're a small cog in the wheel or whatever size of cog you think you are, you know, I think we're all doing our bit. And you know, so I guess Kara, we've all got lots of projects to kōrero too, and there's been a couple you've spoken of, and I wonder which one you want to tap into, because you can kind of go either way with if you want to respond to what Mons and Robbie have been talking about too. I suppose there was slow boil and also mahi you're doing through the university. So
yes, there is. Thank you, Elizabeth, and kia ora, Robbie, for your kōrero. It's you know, it's such a privilege to hear these projects and also to hear these other cogs in these acronym spaces. Is really inspiring to hear, and also to Monsel to recap over that journey and be present to that. I think, well, I have projects for the most part because I'm sort of an academic. All of my projects sort of come under those umbrellas of research, teaching, and service. And I mean, I think for Māori and Pacific academics, researchers, practitioners in these spaces, you know, your career in a way it has to deal with access making and barrier breaking, and being intentional, identifying and being proactive and seeing which of those you need to do or which opportunities present themselves to you, so that you can be a part of making access, and then on the flip side of the coin, breaking barriers for the next generation. And so I try and think about that through service in terms of enrollment for Māori and Pacific. I think, just to touch on what Monsel said, I myself, that really resonated with me when my father first suggested to me that I think about architecture. I sort of, you know, you do that thing when you're really, really young, rather than just young, like the panel is. So when you're really young, you sort of flip through all the people you know, all the adults you know, and you're waiting to hit the one that has that career, and you find yourself not being able to identify an architect in your family. And it was similar for me in that I didn't know anyone, and that did not come into focus over my time at architecture school. It just seemed to me I actually discovered less and less Pacific people were actually working in firms, to the point where I sort of thought there may not be a place for me in practice. I ended up having to sort of find a place, but that's something that I don't want for others. So I really try and sort of place myself at the coalface of enrollments and think through the admissions process in a service way. And then you're quite right, my research more recently has been thinking about, well, with the kind of grace of Grayson Goff, it's been thinking about Kai sovereignty. I recently did a public creative research project with a team of researchers and practitioners. I have to list them off because it'd be rude not to, but Grayson Goff from Boil Up Crew, Lachlan Commode, Matthew Galloway, Chiara Ficcarelli, I don't even know if that's right, Viveka Matagamana and Blaine Weston. I did a project with this team, and we basically thought about what happens when you put the question of self-determination together with food, and consider it within the context of tamaki, and especially for urbanized Māori and Pacific people. And out of that project, I guess what really struck me, or the thing that stayed with me, was if you place the question of self-determination in front of housing, in front of the urban realm, in front of the built realm, what happens for Māori and Pacific peoples and communities.
Mm.
If you place their self-determination in front of those questions, and even the larger existential ones like climate change or climate crisis, what changes in the method, what changes in the outcome?
Mm.
And those are the real litmus tests for me in terms of kaupapa,
Mm.
material change for our people and communities. So those are sort of the big, there's some high level and then there's fine detail stuff in there, but that's, those are the sort of spaces that I'm working in currently and thinking through.
Mm. Kia ora, Cara. Yeah, wow. I mean, self-determination and sovereignty, hey? Very very light topics. Sorry, everybody, you're not here physically in my bedroom. That was sarcasm. Yeah, look, far out. I mean, the act of barrier breaking, I think, is such a huge discussion as well. And I think all of us in our own ways, and I'm just thinking about the mahi you all have as little human beings. I don't think any of these jobs existed really. I mean, did it for you, for Robbie, through Whai Maya? I'm just thinking, it feels like there's been a huge momentum and growth. Our jobs physically existed through the built environment, architecture, but like Cara, like Monsal, for me, I did not grow up with a person following a parent career path in front of me. So I think the thing that I'm loving, but I also know comes with a huge challenge, is we're actually kind of inventing our jobs as we go. There's a gap, or we have this critical ability to ask really hard questions of ourselves, and there's no one else to answer them. So we actually have to both step up, ask the questions, and answer them at the same time. And I think that's, the question around kai sovereignty. I mean, I know that up in Whātua, up by the marae, you've got the whole nursery going, and I've seen the Instagram posts of the sharing of the kai from the mara. It's phenomenal. Like, there is so much going on, and there's so much more to be tapped into. Sorry, I could preach a little bit about this because I think it's really phenomenal. I don't know if any of you guys have anything you want to respond to, but I just I don't think it's fair, but we're beyond kind of complaining about it. But I don't think it's necessarily fair that we are still in the realm of firsts. Sometimes, we're still firsts in our families for doing certain things. I know for me, for example, first in my whānau in about 150 years to receive a moko kauai. There's just generations of disconnect that come with disconnection from reo, from the land, from lots of things, and we have to overcome those, as well as asking these critical questions that are also impacting the whole city. And it's no mean feat, I think. And I think that's where the recognition of all of your work is quite real. I actually wondered, Mons, if there were any, I don't know why I'm coming back to you, but I guess because I see you every other day, bro, on virtual space. If there were any other, because we were talking a little bit about parihaka, and I just wanted to touch on that too, from a kind of placemaking situation, because I think there's some interesting questions that have been asked in projects like that you've all been involved in, actually. And I don't know if Robbie has a response to this, it'd be cool, but if you don't, kapai too. But just what it is about those types of projects that, I don't know, how am I trying to frame this? I'm really interested in this idea, not only of what we're trying to do, but the partnerships that are required to make them happen. So we exist, importantly, doing this mahi, and I think, say, for example, we're lucky at Jazzmax to have Wakamaya. Robbie's incredibly lucky to have Whai Maya, 150 other people from his own whānau working in that space. I know Karamea and the University of Auckland crew now have the most Māori and Pacific academics on staff of any university in the country. So we're now coming to the space of being, quote unquote, lucky to be in spaces of the beginnings of the wealth of the number of people around us. But I wouldn't mind if you want to reflect a little bit on the partnerships that we also require to get through that. So yeah, this is being hosted by Auckland Council. I'm thinking about the relationships and the partnerships that maybe from some of these kōrero that you might just want to reflect on. And I was thinking, Mons, just starting with you and around Parihaka and some of the reflections you've had around those partnerships and the strengths of them to make it, you know, to make it viable, to make it the empowering thing it needs to be.
I think first I'll just like touch on just going back to kind of what you were talking about in terms of like first in terms of like our roles and stuff like that, and given that we are kind of like dual role holders, really being an architectural grad and a member of Wakamaya, it is a very unique thing. And then kind of also being lucky, but then also, you know, our practices in a sense being lucky to have us as well, which is like a huge kind of realization that I've had, you know, over the recent little bit, and particularly over our mahi with Parihaka as well. It's, you know, for example, when we have we were working with a really wonderful, beautiful artist that was nominated by the people of Parihaka, and then also we had, you know, a number of community huis and stuff as well that we would travel down to Parihaka to attend. And these spaces aren't typical spaces for an architectural graduate who, you know, has been at JazzMax for less than 2 years. And a part of that is because I might be early in terms of my experience as an architectural graduate, but, you know, I have a whole lifetime of lived experience of being Māori, and I've been Māori back home. You know, that's been an interesting realization for me to come across. But then also I've been equally surprised at, you know, my voice wanting to be heard in that space as well. I remember presenting a couple of times to the community down there, and, you know, we had, you know, our principal present, we had our project architect present, and then we got to the culmination of that, and then we had quite a few, you know, old queer from the community speak up. What do you reckon, boy? And then, you know, we're actually wanting to, you know, to get, you know, our thoughts and our opinions on things, and a lot of that is recognition of the realization that, you know, I've grown up Māori, and you know, a lot of the thinking they have, whether it's, you know, te ringa wera in the kitchens and things like that, you know, a lot of that stuff can get missed on, you know, when you're just, you know, a grad and things like that. So being able to almost put their mind at ease in spaces like that was really big learning for me. But kind of overall, just, you know, that story of Parihaka is quite a rich one, and just, you know, it kind of like harkens back to a lot of my thesis mahi when I was looking at wahi tapu and sites of significance or war sites during Te Koti's pursuit back home, and kind of bringing light and acknowledgement more than anything of these spaces. A lot of those sites back home are, you know, barren land now. So, you know, in a similar instance to, you know, to this mahi of huge significance and huge history, to capture it and reflect that in a meaningful way in this project is huge. And a big part of that, again, is the likes of these artists. I always feel like artists more than anything, you know, they're historians as well. So, you know, a lot of that has been big learnings for me personally.
Yeah, I think that would link probably quite a lot to the types of mahi that obviously Whaimaya are doing. Panelists have probably just seen a question that's popped up from an anonymous attendee, kia ora anonymous, which I actually think relates quite closely to this kōrero. So I'm just going to weave it in, and I might just pass it to you, Robbie, because you might want to, I would like you to respond to this if you have something to say. But the question / statement is, I think there is a responsibility for projects to consider how they partner with Māori and Pacifica to identify and deliver social outcomes, especially for younger people, to expose them to opportunities and show how they can be viable and support them in achieving their goals. How can we work on this? that definitely comes back to that question of partnership. And I think, you know, I mean, I know that that's a big driver for outcomes for whātua. So,
Kia ora.
yeah.
Yeah, I think when Te Kawa, our tupuna Te Kawa, gifted the whenua to Governor Hobson to start the city, the main reason for that wasn't for to sell it or anything. It was actually to do with partnership. And here we are working towards a partnership. It's not like we currently have it, if you know what I mean. We're still working towards what partnership should look like and what partnership should be between us. And there's partnerships in all types of things, but I think for this one, it's just if the doors are opening for you, then anything's possible. So just like for me, the doors had opened for me to come back to the iwi and work for the iwi, and I get to work in a te ao Māori space where I can be with my whānau and other uri of a common tupuna for a common goal. And I think if other people, if other companies, if other sort of areas open their doors to Māori and Pacifica to come and work in these spaces, then I guess that's the way forward for me anyway.
Yeah, tautoko. One thing I'm gonna link in a little bit, and then I will pass the proverbial mic to Kara. But as a person that sits in the centre of the Venn diagram between having whakapapa to the Pacific and to here in Aotearoa, I do find it's always been quite an interesting tension and dynamic between the bringing together of Māori and Pacifica. And, you know, I know that the universities in various ways have tangled with that, but I know we share a lot of relationship in the unfortunate realities of the deficit statistics, which we don't want to think about, but that is part of it. But obviously, of course, Aotearoa is a part of Te Moana Nui a Kiwa. So we have a relationship, but tangata, well, the position I've always held is that tangata moana, i.e. all of our peoples of the Pacific, are a part of the constituent community that make up tangata tiriti. So they are our partners in relation to te tiriti or waitangi. So when we're thinking about biculturalism, it is still this the duality of tangata whenua and tangata tiriti being Pākehā and Pacifica and all of our other migrant whānau, you know, our Chinese whānau who have been here for generations, our tarara, all those peeps. So that for me is how we all come under the umbrella of thinking about that partnership in relation specifically to te tiriti. Now, I'm not saying that to specifically ask Kara to comment on that. I suppose I just wanted to clarify a little bit too, because I do find we still have this tendency to lump the two units together, and often that is habitual because of the deficit statistics that are often hung off us as a people. I am much more fascinated in the ways we empower each other to think about that relationship actually and the potential exchange, which hasn't happened in quite the same way between us and the Pacific and back and forth. That's starting to happen again. But just back to the point of partnership, I guess, Kara, because I know, you know, sitting in that university space, that will be quite a fascinating, might have a bit of tension sometimes, but I know there's a lot of genuine effort and actually requirement, there's mandate because of who you are as a university to have a treaty obligation. So I just wondered if you had anything you wanted to share in relation to our two tāne kōrero.
Yes.
Spanner in the works.
Looks out into the sky and asks for an answer. I think there's high level things that can be done, and the way those high level mandates make their way down into material societal outcome is oiled by people. So we have to, and from a Pacific perspective, the relationships, the quality of relationships is central. So I know the word partnership it has grave responsibility and accountability within the context of te tiriti. So I'll sort of switch to relationship, and with the understanding that I'm using a slightly different term to talk about something slightly different, but maybe with it has a horizon. And I think we talk about these words like partnership and relationship, but there's also the quality of those has to be good. I think, for example, Pacific people weren't asked before about what housing they needed. And we're in the place where we are now, where they were gentrified out into South Auckland. And now they're being asked, but they're not being listened to. So we're seeing the same outcomes of a partnership. And it's not changing because the partnership, one party is not listening and not meaningfully listening with the same intention for the same self-determination outcome. And so I think maybe this is the appropriate time to talk about partnerships. I think all partnerships can be productive and positive, but they actually have to have intention, and they have to be sort of grounded in a sense of a shared horizon that does center self-determination for Māori and Pacific people. And it's complex. We know that. It's not going to get uncomplicated. But people committing to listening and seeing those hard conversations play out is personally, for me, what's more important, because it's a very, we know how initiatives, policies, mandates, they're sort of very fluid, dynamic. They're not these stagnant things that are, concretized or something like this. Their opportunities spring up. It really takes us all to coalesce around a shared horizon and a shared agenda of self-determination for Māori and Pacific people, outcomes that are on their terms. So, and I think that starts with listening through the conversations that make you uncomfortable at a bodily level. And so I think that's a kind of very, I think about how the high level makes its way down into our everyday lives. And I do think that that's one of them. So I think if there are projects that are being sort of scoped at this point, and thinking through the kind of matrix or the litmus test of its impact for young Māori, young Pacific people, I think perhaps listening through discomfort is one space that actively can be pursued and perhaps measured. And then in terms of the university question, it is they are a partner, and they have many things to heal. They have many wounds to heal between the university and Māori and Pacific, and they have many things to be accountable to, one of which is success rates and graduate profiles. But and I guess we are responsible for holding them accountable.
That's yeah, accountability is quite a kind of an interesting term or discussion, I guess, that can sometimes fall, I guess, on the side of being upheld, or kind of quite singularly sitting on the shoulders of Māori and Pacific, I think, too. And I guess that's partly why I made the point about tangata whenua and tangata tiriti and those kind of constituent communities, because as time goes by, I more and more strongly kind of hold this position that it's actually literally everybody's duty to uphold and be accountable and make others accountable for better outcomes. That, when you say if we want to centre better outcomes for Māori, centre better outcomes for Pasifika people, that will make for better outcomes for everyone. We've just not been centred up until that point. So that's partly where that kind of whakaaro came from. to link to this sort of loose discussion, I suppose, but pointed about partnerships, relationships, and te tiriti as well. So in the lead up to this kōrero, we were having a discussion with Phil Wihongi, who kind of dreamed up this this panel. And Phil sort of reminded us that in February next year, which I don't know if that is like 100 days away or next week at this point, but is in February it will be 18 years until the 200-year anniversary of the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So we're getting to this place where we're going to hit a milestone, right? And it's not really about milestones, but it's thinking about, and this is from my perspective, but whakapapa and those relationships and those connections and what has been stoked and built and what has not been, what has been disconnected or dismantled. It's a simple question for my panelists, but it will likely have complicated answers, maybe. What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind in your work? If we could get to the 18-year mark, so 200 years post, you'll all still be very, very young. What kind of legacy, where do you want to be at there? But even if you want to project past that to a time when you won't be around anymore, what happens at the 118-year mark when we get to the 300-year anniversary? So the simple question is, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind in relation to our built environment, you know, our outcomes for our people, for our communities, our whānau, hapu, iwi, you know, what does that look like for you? Do you get to think about that? Because I'd like you to kōrero to the idea of your legacy. And I will caveat that by saying that I know sometimes thinking about your legacy feels like you as a single person, but you can take it in the proverbial you, as in you and everybody else you're working with, or however you want to structure that. I wouldn't mind passing the kind of kōrero stick to you, Robbie, first, if that's okay. And I say that because I think particularly given we're speaking from whātua kind of, you know, territory, and I want to give an opportunity for you to really speak about it. Because everything we do also influences and is in relation to a lot of the mahi mana whenua are doing too. So I'd like to start with you, Ehua, if that's okay.
Tēnā koe. First off, that's a really cool pātai. I want to acknowledge the iwi, our neighbouring iwi, because, you know, Orake is Orake, the Central Isthmus is the Central Isthmus. We touch over to Onewa Pa, to Mutuwera, Cody Point, right up to Hobsonville, cutting across back around through Te Atatu down to Point Chev, Opo, where the 3,000 acres was given, cutting right across to Onehunga and straight back up to Okahu Bay, Mission Bay, where our marae is, and there's a big loop there. But I want to acknowledge Ngāti Pawa to the North Shore and to the east side. I want to acknowledge Waiahua and the three hapu, Te Aki Tai, Ngāti Te Ata and Nahiwaru, the kaitiaki of those areas. I want to acknowledge Te Kawera Maki out west, and the big ngahere out there. And here we are, me and my iwi. We have a saying called Ko au ko Ngāti Whātua, and in response to your pātai about you know, the legacy might not be about me as an individual, but, you know, me as a collective. When we say that, it's actually what we're trying to say, if I can translate it, is I am the iwi and the iwi is me. And I think when you ask that question, my head's tripping out, because I want to see heaps of things happen between now and then. If I look back to 1740 when my tupuna came through to Tāmaki Makaurau, I look at 1840 when the whenua was given and Hobson arrived to Tāmaki Makaurau, and if I look at you know, and over the next 18 years, I want to see te reo Māori being spoken. We all want to see that. Not only by Māori, but through everyone in Aotearoa. And we're already starting to see that, but we're definitely going to be seeing that a lot more between now and then. I want to hear a lot more of the tupuna names being spoken throughout Tāmaki Makaurau, right across. We have our kāinga set up, our village set up at Orake, and our kāinga for the uri that are living there. But we'll have villages throughout the city. We might have 5 by then, maybe 1 over on the North Shore, because just like back in the day, we moved seasonally. We didn't come to Orake and stay at Orake. We were living right across Tamaki Makaurau, and I want to see that again, and maybe see that community living where there may be a minimum of 10 whare somewhere on the western border, and there's a vibe there where they're all uri and they're the kaitiaki of that sort of area, and maybe another papa kāinga over on the North Shore, and one as close to the city centre as possible, like the kāinga of Okapa and Te Rehu, where our tupuna used to stay, or Te Reuroa, maybe one. I want to see a couple more papa kāinga between now and then. I want to see like today was a special day. We had a mussel drop in Ōkahu Bay, and I want to see our waters a lot more cleaner between now and then. I want to see more green, more green things around, like more rako, and if they're thoughtfully placed across the city, not only looking after the ones that we're trying to look after throughout, the massive developments that are happening, and like the massive intensification that's has come and that will continue to come between now and then. Not only do I want to see the green spaces that we have left looked after, but I would like to see a little bit more. So anything positive, whether it's good for people or good for the taiao, or good for the way we treat each other, that's what I want to see between now and then. And of course, just touching back on the partnership, I want to see a bit more of a better partnership between us, not like you guys are you guys and we're us, and kind of like sort of what the original intent was meant to be, was noho mahi tahi together. So those are just some of the things that I want to see. But yeah, there's definitely a lot more too. So
I think that's lots of food for thought for our listeners. Kara, do you have anything you want to? I'm sure you have lots of things you'd like to add.
Kia ora, Ravi. That was it was wonderful to step into that imagination and that dream and those aspirations. I think I have some, I'm thinking through housing for Māori and Pacific people. I'm thinking about social mobility shifts in the way we engage in the construction industry, as it relates to my own discipline. So seeing our people move from out of into like more technical roles, seeing more sustainable supply chains that empower Māori, particularly at the foresting end, but also seeing those supply chains have be innovated in the next decade or 2 decades, so that we have housing stock that's built from supply chains that are sustainable and better for our world. And I think those are I like to think those out of those flow, they leave a lot of there's a little bit more dreaming space left. And then also I think thinking through urban spaces that are more inclusive for our people, and uphold their mana, have their social well-being at their center, thinking through planning that's that upholds young people's mana as well, because it'll be a shifting landscape. So I think some of these big questions, not seeing our people left behind in the climate crisis, and technology, this moment of COVID, I guess, shows us that we have to keep people accountable to our causes. And we also need non-Māori and non-Pacific people to also jump on board, because the job is too big for just us alone. So seeing those yeah, seeing those things happen and for our built environment to me is definitely something that brings me great pleasure to imagine.
Yola, Mons, do you want to pick up
Mm.
from there?
Kia ora kōrua mō Okupu a tāhua. Yeah, beautiful aspirations in both of what you were saying. Yeah, from kind of, you know, coming back to me being early on this journey, you know, for me personally, I'd love to be, you know, a registered architect, and that kind of ties back to, you know, seeing us in these places. So like, I want it to be a thing where it's not, you know, it's normal to have many registered architects. It's normal to have many of us in all of these whole heaps of different kinds of industries. When we, you know, a big time back to my Uncle Pete back home, you know, he's a builder, but he'll always remind me that, you know, whatever I can draw, he can build. And he can probably draw as well. You know, he's just as talented as any architect I know, and in his own right is an architect, as were a lot of our tupuna as well. So normalizing all of that and tying into a lot of the kōrero that you guys were talking about, you know, sustainability, all of those kind of things. Good architecture has the power to do that. And, you know, linking in all of our rich kōrero and reflecting it in our built environment. You know, that shift from Auckland to Tamaki, you know, capturing that in our built environment in a way that's, you know, identifiable, it's visible, you see it, it's there. But then kind of for me, the next layer of that is that it's, you know, habitable. It's everyone has the ability to see themselves there, but also occupy that space. That's been, you know, a big critique on my end on some, you know, some built things is, yeah, it's nice, but it still doesn't have that same feeling of welcome. And it reminds me of, you know, marae back home, one of our more well-known ones being rongopai is often reserved for, you know, special occasions, and it's one of our most well-known whare. But, you know, Takitimu is known for accepting everyone, and all are welcome there. And, you know, for people to see themselves in our built environment, but then also see that they can occupy, they can inhabitate that place would be, you know, huge. So those are, you know, my kind of aspirations in terms of those things and that whakaaro.
Kia ora, bro. I think something that I just want to briefly mention, if it's not already very apparent, is these three are taking us through quite a wonderfully sort of gentle but sneakily powerful kind of look into I don't know, a view of the world that I really don't think is that far out of reach. If I was to add my little bit of whakaaro to this, it's exactly what everybody said. For me, it's about the legacy I would want to leave behind, but really strengthen while I'm here, is the ecology of us all working together much better. Is the strength of and the centering of tangata whenua as having not only a voice, but the voice that empowers us all to be from Aotearoa. You know, and I mean that when I talk about voice, I mean voice as in the stories being told in all the ways they show up in talks like this, in our buildings, in our art, in our naming of places, in our education systems. For me, those voices are multiple. I think the strength of that would be if our tangata tiriti are able to have more of a pluralistic view and understanding of the way in which the world might work, not only from the comfort of their own position, but from an understanding of Māori. And all the different ways in which that might happen. I like to think about the ecology in which we exist and the way we all affect one another, and it definitely takes a literal village. We've had a couple of other questions come through, and I think in a funny way we answered them. One of them was, if you could be mayor for a day, is there anything you'd like to start or continue? I don't think we need to answer that because I think we have answered that one. And I will say too, and I guess this was partly my steer for tonight, was we weren't trying to focus too much on the challenges. I think there is a place and a time to pick apart and dissect the challenges, but I guess what I really wanted our panelists to think about, given let's say our relative youth in our careers and the direction we're heading in, we want to be aspirational about what is possible heading forward. I think for those of us or those of you in front of us at the moment, in a lot of respects, we want you to help. And in some respects, we might just need you to kind of move aside. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean enable the youth who are coming through to push. And I say that to ourselves of our next generation coming in behind us. Our teenagers know things and want to do things and want to respond to things like the climate crisis in a way we're not. So it is a statement I put outwards, humbly knowing that it's a statement that reflects exactly on us as well. So I guess those are my things that I want to kind of underscore, but I just want to quickly also say a big thank you to our panelists. I don't think we've got a ton of time for a Q&A, and I want to give Councillor Al Filipina an opportunity to actually speak. And then also Robbie is going to close our evening with the karakia. So just quickly from me, thank you very much for listening to this very beautiful conversation tonight. And yeah, I'll pass over to Councillor Filipina. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah. Tēnā koutou katoa, and to you all, just wanted to mihi to you all. And I was going to give some reflections, but with the time that we have, I may not have the opportunity to give the reflections, which is okay with me. I do, however, want to acknowledge you all. I want to acknowledge also the audience. It reached 109 while we were talking. So it reached 109, but to you, Elizabeth, I just want to acknowledge you because the questions you posed, and I'm going to keep an eye on the 2 minutes that I have left, but the questions that you ended up posing to the panelists are some of the leading questions that I've heard. Now, I want to go through with some of the insights that I saw, and I think the first one was around whakapapa and everything else. And I know, Karamia, when you ended up acknowledging your parents and the fact that they worked in the public sector, public service, and you know, there's as you know, there's an old Samoan proverb which goes ole ala, ile pule, ole tautua, which is the road to leadership is through service. And I want to acknowledge you in regards to that, because you acknowledge your parents and the fact that they put upon you the service that they were doing as leaders, and that's also followed with you. Now, Robbie, for you, what I took out of the whakapapa for me was 6,000 to 7,000 of us. That is what you said when you were acknowledging your tupuna. And one of the key things was to look after Tāmaki Makaurau. And you know, again with your tupuna, for me again was all about ainga, it was about whānau. To you, Monsor, your Peter, your Uncle Peter, that you mentioned, and you said to his that, you know, it was important that you acknowledge where you come from, but also he was the impetus that got you to get to where you are, and everybody's got your fella's bio. So, you know, acknowledging your tupuna, your parents, is so important. when I also look at it and the questions, look, I'm just going to go through some of this because I love the kōrero, and I'm sorry it's now 7 o'clock.
Don't
But
worry
look,
about it. Couple
look,
minutes over.
yeah, look,
Absolutely fine.
I really did, because when you said, you know, you asked them, I mean, projects that you are proud of, you know, and when I ended sort of going through Monso, for you it was breaking down the barriers, you know, and you are so right in breaking down those barriers, because if you don't start breaking down the barriers, we're always going to be pushing up against the same things all the time. And so, Monso, to you, so important about breaking those barriers. Robbie, for you, it was returning and promoting the original names to our whenua. And what's so important as well was the whakapapa to those names, because it's no good just putting a name there and nobody knows the whakapapa to it. And for me, it's reflecting on Auckland Council with Te Kete Rukuruku. You know, that is our policy at the moment, because we wish to return those names. But guess who's going to return those names? Not Auckland Council, it's not the Kauniera, it's our mana whenua who are going to return those names. And just recently, we went through the committee around regional parks and the dual naming of our regional parks. That is so important for our mana whenua. Karamea, when you said it was access making policy, barrier breaking for the next generation through the environment, self-determination. You know, that is what is so key to driving everything that you have. And I know it's 2 minutes past, but look, I'm on a roll now. And I just really wanted to, the reason I want to do this is because I want to acknowledge all the kōrero, all the talanoa that has happened, but the kōrero that you have given to the people who are on here. I want to acknowledge that. You know, and Elisabetta, you ended up saying inventing our jobs as we go, ask really hard questions about ourselves. And the key example for you was with you know 150 years from your perspective. It's the first in my whānau in 150 years to receive your moko kaua, a kaue. You know, so look, that's what this is all about, and it's acknowledging the first. Partnerships, you asked about partnerships. Now with partnerships, again, with you, Monso, you mentioned the dual role holders that you hold, the dual roles that you hold. And I'm mihi to that. You also mentioned in your thesis around wahi tapu and Te Koti's pursuit. You know, this is the beginning for you. And again, I acknowledge that. Karamea, when you ended up committing to listening through conversations, and it's about the accountability. You know, this is what's so key. This is what the people are listening in regards to that. Can I just finish off on the last one, because I love the last question. You know, Elisabetta, I love the last question, because it's, what do you want to see? You know, what's your legacy? And that question is a very good one, because it gives us an insight into the future. And that's what you've given our panelists. And Robbie, the first thing that you wanted to do straight away was to acknowledge iwi, your neighbouring iwi. You acknowledge Ngāti Paua. You acknowledge our Waiohua collective. You acknowledge Te Kawarawa Maki. So for you, acknowledge them first, and then you ended up going back to your iwi. So, and I love that, because what you said was, and I've written it down so I can use it. And when I do use it, I'll be quoting you, Robbie. It won't be from me. And that is, I am the iwi. The iwi is me. So look, and I totally agree with it. You also want to see heaps of things happen. Te reo Māori spoken by everyone, villages everywhere, papakainga. You got waters a lot cleaner than what we have now, more green around the area, and that's not cannabis, but you know what I mean. You know, it's more green about that. Karamea, when you ended up going more sustainable or moved to sustainable supply chains. Why? Because the housing stock built from supply chains is better for our world. And you're right, it is, because the ownership needs to come back with us. Urban spaces, more inclusive planning that upholds young people's mana. Non-Māori, non-Pacific people, they need to come on the waka with us, because the job is just too big for Māori and Pacific. And I totally agree, because it is all of us together in the waka. Monsor, you know, the fact that you want to be a registered architect, again, you mentioned your uncle Peter, and you know, when he said to you, whatever you can draw, I can build. You then mentioned sustainability. Good architecture has the ability to do that around the sustainability. And, you know, just to finish off to our MC, I mihi to you, but you know, for you was ecology of us as working together and what exists, and tiriti tangata whenua have the voice, and you know, tangata tiriti, and it has to be aspirational. To you all, I mihi to you all, I thank you so much. What Philip Wihongi, whānau from up home, he is right. You are the leaders, and you will end up leading. There's one, there's a whakatauki I just wanted to mention, but before I hand it over to you, Robbie, and it's one, listening to you all from my perspective, ends up, I think, for me doing, and that it's e harataku toa I te toa takitahi. Engari, e toa takitini. My strength is not that of a single warrior, but that of many. The reason I say that is because you have all acknowledged your tūpuna, and your whakapapa. Ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. I'm going to hand it back to Robbie, and to everybody and those included. Thank you so much. Kia ora nā. Sorry to take so much. Kia ora.
Taku rangatira tēnā koe. Anei rā mātou e mihi atu nei ki a koe. Mō I whai wāhi mai ki Wainganui I a mātou I tēnei pō. Ko ia tēnei ko te kotahitanga o tātou, e manaaki nei tō tātou whenua, I ngā whenua nei o Tāmaki Makaurau. Ko koe tēnā I pā ki tēnā kaupapa, I tēnā kaupapa, ko ngā kaupapa I kōrero hia e mātou I tēnei pō. O tira ko ngā kaupapa e wawatatia nei e tātou, hei oranga mō tātou katoa, no reira e taku rangatira tēnā koe. Tēnei ka tautoko ake hoki rā I ngā mihi kia koutou e okuhua, e aku tuahine, e te tuakana. I mua I taku whakakaping I tēnei hui, e whakaro nui ana kia Grayson. Taranaki maunga, e mihi atu ana rā ki aia, ki taku matua hoki anō rā, ki a matua Phil Wihongi, ko ia te take, kei konei tātou katoa I tēnei pō, nāna tātou I pōhiri mai, kia piri mai ki tēnei pō, ko ia tērā I mau atu ki tōna kurapō, ko ia tēnei ko tāna pō whakamutunga, o reira ko ngā whakaaro nui ki aia, o tira kia koutou katoa, e te iwi e whakarongo mai nā, koutou kua mātakitaki mai nei I tēnei pō, tēnei te mihi rangatira kia koutou katoa, ko ngā manaakitanga, ko ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ka taki nā he karakia. Unuhia atu rā te pūtake o ngā kōrero I te wānanga, unuhia atu rā te hautapu ariki. E rongo e whakairia rā kia paitara whare, ka whakamau ai kia tīnā, hui e tai ki e.
All the best, you fellas. Well done, man. That was so cool. Notice I didn't mention my age because I don't want to up your fellas' level. When you get somebody this old. So no way was I going to mention how old I am. So look, ka kite anō, whaasui fua.
Yeah, hopefully to see you again in the flesh one day.
Aye, for sure.
Yeah,
Ka kite anō,
thank you
ka kite.
everyone. All
Aye.
right, ka kite.